So today we are learning about monopolies. We are moving on from oligopolies. We are going to be looking at different types of monopoly. It's two really kind of sections of monopolies that we're going to be looking at, the theoretical side and then kind of the legal side, and looking at the overlap of those two. So monopolies, I know you've heard of them, some of you have played the game. I do have a fun fact about the game actually. The game Monopoly was set up and created by Quakers to warn young people of the dangers of capitalism. So next time you're playing Monopoly, think about that when you are forcing people out of all of their money. So today we're going to start off by looking at a theoretical monopoly. Now, it's not to say by calling it theoretical that it could never or it doesn't ever exist. There are a few kind of examples where we can see that it might have existed in history. If we think about the East India Trading Company, that might be potentially a theoretical monopoly, and maybe you know some throughout history too. Wonderful. So a theoretical monopoly is where there is just one firm in the market. So the entire market is dominated by one firm. There's just one, and it's 100% of the market share. So if a consumer decides to enter the market, they are going to be buying from one producer, and that is it. So there's no competition, right? There might potentially be the threat of competition that the monopoly might respond to, but they are the only one in the market. So here we have our theory. This is again our theoretical monopoly. This is not true for the legal monopoly, but for the theoretical monopoly, there's just one firm. And obviously because it's one firm, then they are going to be profit maximising. We usually presume profit maximising anyway, even when we look at perfect competition, but we are here. Now that's not to say that a monopoly might decide, or even a theoretical monopoly might decide to revenue maximise, but they might decide to revenue maximise for a specific reason. Their default is always going to be profit maximising. So the main thing that we can tell with a theoretical monopoly is that the company is the same as the industry. Now we're going to have a look at that in greater detail literally right now, so don't kind of jump the gun on that one. But we're going to look at what the firm diagram is, what the industry diagram is, and how they kind of directly relate to each other. So our firm diagram is exactly the same, but I want you to think about what tiny things might be slightly different, how it might look different, or what might the monopoly kind of be like theoretically in a diagram. So maybe pause now and have a think about that. So the two main differences that I would say is, one, obviously, if you've entered the market, you have to buy from one firm. So the AR and MR is incredibly inelastic, right? Because there's not other firms in the market competing against them, so their AR and MR is very, very inelastic. The second thing is when we think about an oligopoly and we think about the other half of this diagram, we've thought about revenue, now we're going to think about costs. The cost for a monopoly is obviously going to be a lot lower than in oligopolies. And I just want you to think about why that might be true and try and come up with an answer. So the reason why that's true is because in oligopolies, we know that they don't really like to compete on price, and therefore they do lots of non-price competition, and non-price competition is expensive. Think about those huge advertising campaigns that we have around us in oligopolies. They're incredibly expensive. Whereas monopolies, they don't have to advertise, because if you've entered the market, you have to come to them anyway. So they may not waste any money, or not waste, but spend any money on advertising at all. So we're going to think about that when we draw this diagram. So the first thing that we know is that they're going to have very inelastic. That doesn't mean that you have to draw it completely inelastic or has to be completely different to your oligopoly, but just so in your head you're kind of putting that theory together. And I'm going to draw this diagram in the exact same order as I normally do, the order that you should be doing it to make sure you get it right every time in your exam. So we're going to have an inelastic and then we're going to draw our cost, and then we're going to find our profit maximising position. This is the quantity, go up. Now I know here that the firm is going to have low cost and lots of supernormal profit. So I'm going to draw my average cost because my fixed costs aren't going to be that high. Somewhere relatively low. Now I could do it all the way down here, that's not necessarily an issue, but you can do it as low as you like. The same rules very much still apply with your MC and your AC. So I've drawn it very, very low there. And I've done that particularly as well so that I can kind of show you some of the mistakes that get made all the time in the exam, which is where here, students, they're trying to find that supernormal profit, they know that it's here, but they go down to just the profit maximising position and they'll draw it across there. Now that's not correct, because the same theory applies, that your profit is the difference between your average revenue and your average cost. Just because your average cost happens to be lower than where your MC equals your MR doesn't mean that that's not supernormal profit. So we just go across here and we can see here that the firm is making very large amounts of supernormal profit, right? And that's important because monopolies are naturally going to be making huge amounts of supernormal profits, especially if they're a theoretic monopoly, because they don't have any competition in the market. So what I want us to think about is how does that correlate to the industry, right? And our industry point is the same. Now it's not going to have such an inelastic demand, because remember the demand curve for the firm and the demand curve for the industry may well be different. So our industry diagram is still going to be the same, where we're going to have demand and supply. And obviously there is an equilibrium price, which is here. So this is our equilibrium price, and we have an equilibrium quantity. Now we know that when you have a downward sloping AR curve, you do have some price setting power. Now for a monopoly, they have all the price setting power. They can set the price because they're the only firm in the market. So they can set the price really wherever they want to, but they're going to set it at their profit maximising price, which we can see is here. This is the price of the monopoly. And because they're the only firm in the market, we also know that they are going to set that price for the entire market, because the price for them as a firm is the same as the price for the market. So actually what we can do is we can take that price and we can go all the way across to here. This is the monopoly price. And we can see that this is the price that's being sold in the market. And at this price, this quantity, M, which is equal to this quantity. Now that should make automatic sense to you. So the quantity that is produced by the only firm in the market is going to be equal to the quantity that's produced in the market, because they're the only ones who are producing and supplying the market. So what we can see here is, there's a lot going on here. We're going to break it down. So what we can see here is, one, that the firm here is making a lot of supernormal profit, and that is being replicated in the market and has some real effects. Now, one of the first things that we can see that's very obvious is that the producer, the monopoly, has taken a lot of consumer surplus. So under kind of allocative efficiency, where you're being charged the market price and consumers and producers are maximising their utility, if a consumer or a producer is maximising their utility, then it's Pareto optimum. If it's Pareto optimum, then one person can't be made better off without somebody else being made worse off. That's the market equilibrium price. So we can see here that that's just where the consumer and the producer surplus is maximised. Now what's happening here in our diagram, what's happening here in our industry, is that the monopolist, the producer, is actually able to steal and take away some of the consumer surplus. And we can see exactly where that is here. So this area here is consumer surplus that's been taken by the producer. So it's an exchange, not so much an exchange, but a taking of welfare. So this area here is consumer surplus that's been taken by the producer. And they're able to take that because of the price setting power, because they're able to set prices and there isn't really anybody intervening or telling them that they can't, and there's no normal market mechanisms through competition driving down those prices. There's no price war, there's no anything else, there's no firm coming in stealing their market share so they have to lower prices. They're just able to set that price. But obviously, we can also see that the producer surplus is also this area here, so it's this bit here, and the consumer surplus is this section here. Their consumer surplus has fallen, and the producer surplus is this section extended down here. So something else is happening here. You know, something else is very clearly going on, and that is that there's an area of consumer surplus and producer surplus that nobody is using. It's lost, it's gone, you know, and that's this bit on the diagram here, this triangle here. This triangle here is consumer or producer surplus that would exist under perfect competition, right? So this triangle here is the amount of consumer or producer surplus, and we know that consumer and producer surplus is also what we kind of value as their welfare, what we measure as their welfare in economics. So we can see here that producer and consumer welfare has been lost, right? It's not being benefited. This person who would be willing to pay this price here, so say for instance we've got this price here, this person, this price is below, let me kind of put it on for you. So say for instance this price here, there is an individual who is willing to pay that much, even under price setting, they're willing to pay that much, but they haven't got access to the market because of the amount of the price setting power by the monopolist, right? So because the price is actually this much, they're not willing to enter the market. So there are consumers that are pushed out of the market and their welfare has been lost. So this triangle here, I know it's red so it's slightly confusing, but I don't have any other colours, is the welfare lost to the whole industry, to the whole market, because of the monopoly power. Now the monopolist is better off because they managed to steal some from the consumer, right? But there are lots of consumers that, not even under just perfect competition where they've got the entire section there for the consumer surplus, actually is the same as if it was, there's more welfare loss for the consumers the more price setting power a firm has, and obviously a monopolist has the most price setting power, and therefore some consumers would be better off even under an oligopoly or monopolistic market structure. So it's not necessarily just because perfect competition versus monopoly. Actually there are two market structures in the middle there that would also potentially, unless there's overt collusion going on in the market, they would be better off. Because remember, when there's overt collusion, you have a group of firms that are essentially doing this. They're acting as a monopolist and setting that market price, right? Because they're acting as one firm. This is what that would look like. So there is a welfare loss. Now, there is a welfare loss for any form of market kind of price setting power. So even in monopolistic market structures, there is a small amount of welfare lost for the market. However, it's the most under monopoly power and price setting power. Now that doesn't mean that there aren't some benefits potentially to a theoretical monopoly. It may well be that they use all of this supernormal profit here to invest and have outstanding products that would never exist if it was with competition and they were having to spend that money on advertising. But I mean, that's a potential argument. I don't know whether there's that much validity or strength to that argument, but it is potentially true. I would say right now, like, don't confuse this with a natural monopoly. We are going to be looking at natural monopolies. So if your head you're thinking of, oh, well, what about water companies, or what about the post office and letter sorting? You know, they're not great examples because they're actually natural monopolies, and we'll be going through those later on. Here we're talking about private firms where it would be under other circumstances, efficient to have more than one firm in the market, actually one firm has just been able to create so much market dominance that they have that, and they've managed to push everybody else out of the market, and just increase barriers to entry and exit to the market so high that actually competition is not able. One of the biggest things that you need to understand about monopolies is the biggest difference between an oligopoly and a monopoly, and we'll be looking at this in more detail when we actually look at legal monopolies rather than theoretical monopolies, is that oligopolies, the kind of defining market kind of characteristic of an oligopoly is that firms make decisions interdependently, right? So they make decisions based on each other and the outcomes of each other. However, in a monopoly, it's almost the opposite of that, and actually they make their decisions completely independently. So they make their decisions based on what's best for them, not what they think anybody else is going to be doing in the market. And obviously that allows them to set prices here, it allows them to take a lot of the consumer surplus, it allows them to create a lot of welfare lost. So, kind of summing up exactly what we've learned and going into a little bit more depth. So the firm price is the industry price in a theoretical monopoly, right? We can put those diagrams next to each other, as we literally did, as you have written down on your piece of paper, hopefully, and see that actually they are the exact same price and also the exact same quantity, and that quantity that is set is the monopolist profit maximising quantity. That's the quantity that is set in the market. We can also see that one firm has captured a lot of the consumer surplus, and actually if that profit maximising position were to change, they may well take more and more of the consumer surplus as well. And finally, there's a welfare loss in the market for a monopolist. So when a monopolist exists, and it is true, like I said, for all firms that have price setting power, for all markets that have price setting power, but no more so than in a monopolist market situation, an industry that has a monopolist in it, theoretically, because that is where they have the most welfare loss in the industry. So this one here is really important for you to understand. So that's us done for today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that this has answered a lot of your questions. I look forward to looking at legal monopolies with you next lesson. Bye!